Hello, and welcome to my CSA Day presentation on employing diversity, improving hiring practices for all. This presentation focuses on how the current hiring practices can negatively impact people with disabilities, and it also provides solutions based on best practices from scholarly journals. My name is Tasia Bromell, and I'm a senior here at Meredith College. I'm majoring in business administration with a concentration in human resource management, and I'm also an honors student, so this presentation serves in conjunction with my honors thesis. So it is reported that 50 million people in the United States has a disability that affects their relationship to their work. And 90% of companies claim to prioritize diversity, but only 4% of companies consider disability in their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. With this in mind, the purpose of my research was to investigate how companies can improve the hiring process for people with physical, intellectual, and psychiatric disabilities. So in this presentation, I will cover why I'm addressing the hiring process. I will provide some disability definitions. I will share some legal requirements. I will discuss the benefits, barriers, and challenges of hiring people with disabilities. I will provide recommendations on improving the hiring practices, and I will share some of my personal experience as it relates to this topic. So what is the hiring process, and why did I focus on hiring practices? The hiring process includes all of the steps a company takes to attract potential employees, evaluate their potential success to perform a job, and invite the best candidate to join the organization as an employee. So I focus on hiring practices because ensuring that people with disabilities are in the candidate pool and increases the employment of people with disability, minimizes the cost of hiring, and increases the organization's value proposition. And we'll get a little bit more into this later on in the presentation. So before moving into the specifics of my research, I wanted to ensure I provided a clear definition of disability and discuss some of the legal implications. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, provides a broad definition of disability as a condition that substantially limits one or more major life activities. The ADA further states that employers cannot discriminate against a qualified individual, and they must provide reasonable accommodations unless it results in undue hardship. So the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, or the ADA, is the most notable federal law regarding disability. And this is because this is the world's first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. So in summary, work organizations are required to have fair hiring practices for qualified disabled candidates, and this is because they're covered by the ADA. They're also required to provide reasonable accommodations to support those individuals in performing the work unless it requires a significant difficulty or expense. So employing individuals with disabilities offers substantial benefits to all organizational stakeholders. Some benefits of hiring people with disabilities include higher performance, company loyalty and lower costs, and providing companies with unique competitive advantage. So first, I'll talk about higher performance. So according to research from Accenture, companies that employ people with disabilities and support them outperform their peers. Moving on into company loyalty and lower costs. Research shows that employees with disabilities are more loyal than employees without. People with disabilities tend to show more gratitude and have lower absentees. Furthermore, disabled employers display lower turnover rates. Therefore, companies can save money in hiring people with disabilities because they don't have the cost of rehiring and retaining new employees. And so the last benefit I'm going to discuss is the unique competitive advantage that hiring people with disability brings to an organization. So not only do people with disability bring a unique perspective, but companies can benefit from increased customer loyalty and satisfaction, higher work ethic, an inclusive work culture, and ability awareness. So the barriers employers have in hiring people with disability includes an applicant's self-efficacy, employers' misconceptions, and online access barriers. So first, we'll talk about applicant self-efficacy. So research states that unfair hiring practices can lower someone's self-efficacy about their ability to actually obtain a position, which can result in inactive job-seeking activities and lack of investment in further education or training. So this creates a cycle in which people with disabilities are less successful in acquiring employment that are suitable for their needs. Secondly, moving on into employer misconceptions. There are 3 misconceptions that I'm going to discuss in this presentation, and that is about how well an applicant will perform on the job, accommodation costs and types of disabilities. So Coro describes that employers' misperceptions as employers' belief that people with disabilities are less capable to perform at the same standard as able-bodied employees, and he used the term lacking competence. Moving on into accommodation costs, employers also have the misperception that hiring people with disabilities is extremely costly due to the high accommodation costs. However, evidence from a 2017 Job Accommodation Network, or JAN, surveys illustrate that 59% of accommodations needed by employees cost almost nothing, and another 36% of accommodations were a one-time cost of about $500. The third notable misconception is that employers' attitudes towards certain disability types. So Sprong mentioned that employers display a more negative attitude towards hiring people with intellectual and mental disabilities rather than physical and sensory disabilities. And this may be because people are a little bit more familiar with accommodating for people with physical disabilities. However, regardless of disability preferences, discrimination still exists for all types of people with disabilities. And so we've talked about an applicant self-efficacy, we talked about employer misconceptions, and so the last thing I'm going to mention is online access barriers. So although online recruitment has become more prevalent over the years, the Partnership on Employee and Accessible Technology, or PEAT, discovered on a survey that 46% of the disabled respondents described their last online job application experience as difficult to impossible. So I just described the barriers in hiring people with disabilities. However, it's important to note that there are real challenges employers face in hiring disabled candidates. However, these challenges are often the exception and not the norm when hiring people with disabilities. In this presentation, I will talk about the most significant challenge that I found, which are accommodation costs. Though for most employers, accommodation costs are not burdensome, as I mentioned previously in the barrier sections. Critics argue that reasonable accommodation can be burdensome to certain employees, especially those that are in small organizations that don't have the resources to accommodate for disabled applicants in hiring. And although hiring discrimination is very present in today's society, there are many ways to minimize this issue. So organizations can combat hiring discrimination by understanding some of the barriers that I mentioned previously and providing accommodations for people with disabilities. So some example of online accommodations that employees can consider implementing include screen reader compatibility, alternative text for images, color contrast, keyboard accessibility, controls for moving content, video captions, and more. Employers can also monitor the avenues they are taking to recruit people with disabilities. So they may want to partner with disability-related advocacy organizations or attend disability-related job fairs. Furthermore, sharing success stories of people with disabilities who have performed well allows for employers to see the benefits of hiring them, and consulting with disability employment specialists can be essential for employers because they can be people to turn to for disability-related questions such as legislative requirements and challenges with accommodation. So this research was extremely important to me because I am someone who has faced challenges as a person with a physical disability. My life experience as a student with a physical disability has led me to believe that it's harder for people like me to attain employment, and employers would believe that I'm incapable of performing well. And my research supports that my feelings are valid. With this being said, hiring discrimination due to my disability is something that I may face soon as a graduating senior. However, I want to acknowledge that I may be a little bit biased towards improving the hiring process for disabled individuals, but overall, this research supported my thoughts that hiring practices for people with disabilities need to improve. So, one of my Meredith professors always tells me that people with disabilities are first people. And although I agree with the sentiment, I want to add to that. People with disabilities are first people and should be treated as such. Employing people with disabilities should not be a requirement, but the norm. So here are my resources. And before I end, I would like to acknowledge all of the people who assisted me in my research. Thank you, Dr. DeLise, who is an HR professor here at Meredith. She has served as my thesis advisor, and I could have not picked a better person to assist me with my research. She's challenged me throughout, and she's been a huge support system. So I just want to thank you for everything. And also thank you, Dr. McMillan, who is the honors director here at Meredith College, for her unwavering support of my honors thesis. So this is the end of my presentation. Again, my name is Tasia Bromell, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or my Meredith email. Thank you for listening.